So what we're doing here is I've created a two-way frequency table. A two-way frequency table is where there are two bits of information. There is, I have boys, I have girls, and I have relationship and not a relationship. A lot of times we add a third column to these two-way frequency tables, and I like to call it the subtotal column. Subtotal column. Sometimes I will even refer to those as the margins, of the two-way frequency table. Now this two-way frequency table is not completely finished, but I know that there's enough information here for you to figure out what goes where, and we can finish this table. If 4 boys are in a relationship and there are 24 boys in this classroom, do you know how many are not in a relationship?
15.
How many?
20. 21.
Golly. And if there are 10 girls that are not in a relationship and we have 12 girls in this class, how many are in a relationship?
2. That was some quick math, Ralphie.
And how many total students are in a relationship here, boy or girl?
6.
How many total boys or girls are not in a relationship in this class?
30.
Those are our subtotals. And so how many students do we have in class today?
36.
Do you notice how these subtotals and these subtotals both add up to the grand total? I'm going to put this little one in box, and I'm going to put grand total right there. Okay? This is a two-way frequency table, and the math of a two-way frequency table is pretty simple. What's hard about the two-way frequency table is the language behind it. So, first word I need to teach you is frequency. We've already talked about it in section 1. Do you remember what frequency means? You forgot. Nobody remembers what frequency means. We defined it in 6.1. Look at your 6.1. Somebody find it and tell us what frequency means. Still don't hear it. Oh, look at you guys are from Print Shop. I can hand you this.
Oh, I have it. How many?
Perfect. Thank you.
What? That's a promo.
It says what, Ralphie?
How many?
How many? There you go. That's what frequency means. That's what frequency means. When you see the word frequency, it means how many. So the new word that we're going to add with frequency, because I'm not just having you write it down, there are 2 types of frequencies. There are joint frequencies, and there are marginal frequencies. There are joint frequencies, and there are marginal frequencies. A joint frequency is a how many on the inside. How many on the inside? And I'm going to put an elbow. Pretend this is a person, and this is their elbow joint. I want you to think of an elbow joint as something like a how many at the joint of 2 things. For example, if I were to ask you, what is the joint frequency of girls in a relationship? What is the joint frequency of girls in a relationship? You would say 2. There's 2 girls that are in a relationship. If I said, what's the joint frequency of boys not in a relationship? Joint frequency of boys not in a relationship, you would say 20. Because you know what the word joint frequency means. It means how many at that joint between those two criteria. Marginal frequencies are different. Margin is a how many in the margins. On the outside. I'm going to put in the margin. How many on the outside or how many in the margin? When I ask questions like, how many boys do we have in class today? I would ask it like that. Let me ask it this way. What's the marginal frequency of boys in class today?
24.
Right. That's the type of question. I can say what's the marginal frequency of students not in a relationship? What's the marginal frequency of students not in a relationship in this class? 30. Because you have to know what those words mean. As soon as you know what the words mean, then the questions are easy. Okay. Next word, relative. Joint frequency, marginal frequency, now relative. When you see the word relative, it is just like, I hate to tell you this, when you grow up someday and you go off to college, you're out of the house, you're college and plus, and you come back, your relatives do stuff to you all the time. They start saying, when are you going to get married? When are you going to, or if you're married, when are you going to have kids? They do that. That's what relatives do. Hey, your cousin Tommy does this. Aren't you going to be a doctor and pay for me? That's what my grandpa always used to say. Aren't you going to be a doctor? Okay. Relative. My relatives compare. When I see this word relative, it means compared to, and I'm going to put out of the grand total. Compared to or out of the grand total. Relative is used in conjunction with, along with those other words. For example, if I change what we talked about last time and I say joint relative frequency. Joint relative frequency. Now what I'm saying is how many of that out of the total. Let's do a nice easy one. What's the joint relative frequency of girls not in a relationship? Joint relative frequency of girls not in a relationship. 10 out of how many? 36 total. 10 out of the grand total. 10 out of 36. That's the joint relative frequency. Okay? What if I said the marginal relative frequency? Marginal relative frequency. Let me give you an example. What if I said, what is the marginal relative frequency of students not in a relationship in this class? Students not in a relationship, marginal relative frequency would be not just 30 out of, and you would reduce it into lowest terms. Don't forget to reduce. I'm going to put down here, reduced to lowest terms. And I don't know if I've shown you this yet, but I want to make sure you know, since we're using calculators all the time in this class, our calculators know how to reduce fractions. And so just in case, I switch out of stat mode, I go back to computation mode, and I press the fraction button, If I say 30 out of 36 and I type 30 out of 36 on my calculator, it will reduce it and put it in lowest terms for me. If you aren't good at reducing fractions, don't be afraid to double check on your calculators whether you're doing it correctly or not. Okay? Okay, so we have joint frequencies, we have marginal frequencies, but if we add the word relative, then we're going to compare it to the grand total. Oh, guess what? There's one more, and it's called conditional relative frequency. Conditional relative frequency. Conditional relative frequency means that there's a given condition. So what this is going to be out of, this is going to be compared to, because we still have the word relative, we're going to compare it to a relative condition. It is out of the given, and I'm going to capitalize given because that word is usually used whenever they ask you these questions. Out of the given subtotal. The way this is worded, out of the given subtotal. I'm going to go back to my chart up here. They'll ask you a question like this. How many girls? What is the conditional relative frequency? What's the conditional relative frequency of girls that are in a relationship given, or what is the conditional relative frequency of girls given that they are in a relationship? Given that they are in a relationship. Conditional relative frequency. What is the conditional relative frequency of girls given that they are in a relationship? So what that's telling you is, when it says given, that's what your subtotal is. Given that they are in a relationship. How many are in a relationship? No. Now, how many girls are in a relationship? How many how many people are in a relationship? That means you ignore everything else. It's out of the 6 when we talk about a condition. What's the condition? The condition was given that they are in a relationship. So, how many are girls out of the ones that are in a relationship? It's 2 out of, which reduces to 1/3. Okay? You can also do conditional relative frequency this way. How many are in a relationship given, or what's the conditional relative frequency of girls given, or that are in a relationship given that they are girls? Given that they are girls. What's the conditional relative frequency of people in a relationship given that they are girls? So here's the deal. When I say given, and it says girls, you're going to do out of how many are girls? Out of how many are girls?
2.
No. Out of how many are girls right here? What's our total in that class? We have 12 girls. So then, are there in a relationship that are girls? There's 2 out of 12, which reduces to 1/6. That's the hardest part of two-way frequency tables, is knowing what these 1, 2, 3, 4 words mean. So there are several questions like this. Do you need some more examples? Some, okay, so here we go. I'm going to write down one more example, and then I'll pass out the worksheet, and we'll go from there. Okay? So here's my one more example. I'm going to use the same chart that we're using. What is the, we've already done joint frequency and marginal frequency. The relative frequency, we're going to do that. What is the relative frequency of boys not in a relationship? What is the relative frequency of boys not in a relationship? What do you think, Logan? 20 out of 36. Do you agree with Logan? Yes, he is correct. By the way, we never leave our answer 20 out of 36 because we forgot to do something, didn't we? It's got to be in lowest terms. Either you put 20 out of 36 to reduce it, which is 5 out of 9, which I would accept, or if you want to, you can switch it to a decimal to see what it is. It's easier for me to write 5 over 9 than it is for me to write 0.5 repeating. So I'm going to write equals 5 out of 9. Okay? That was a relative frequency. Let's do one more for a conditional relative frequency. What is the conditional relative? I'm going to abbreviate. Frequency, I'm going to abbreviate. What is the conditional relative frequency of people not in a relationship given that they are boys? What is the conditional relative frequency of people not in a relationship given that they are boys? What is the non-reduced fraction going to be? The non-reduced fraction going to be? I heard 4 out of 24 and I heard 20 out of 24. Which one is it? 20 out of 24 is the non-reduced fraction, because when I say given that they are boys, we have to think it's out of, I got to go back up so you can see it. When I say given that it's boys, it's out of the 24. How many are not in a relationship? 20 are not in a relationship compared to the 24. Reduce it. Perfect, or as a decimal is fine. Okay, we're going to stop for your notes right there.